I've talked to a couple of other experts, right, about this. We did a story on this based on, in large part, on the data that you've collected and published. But I spoke with Professor James Allen Fox from Northeastern University, and I spoke to Dr. James Densley, who helps run the Violence Project, and they both seem to consider this was kind of a phenomenon that you might call a reversion to the mean, right? This is something where you're seeing a retraction because you had previously seen this great expansion in the murder rate during the pandemic. What do you make of that? Is that how you view this remarkable decline in murder rate?
Sort of. I think that reversion to the mean is plausible, but there was nothing inherent that this was gonna happen regardless of whatever anybody did. Or there's no reason to suspect that in 2023 we would start to see a large decline and we would see it accelerate into 2024. I think the main challenge to understanding is that we still don't understand what happened in the 90s. So fully understanding it is very difficult at this point. I think that COVID going to the background sort of helped push it along, that the pandemic exited the pandemic phase. And for most Americans, it's just sort of in the background of everyday life. You don't really think about it a ton. And I think that a lot of the spending that was taking place, especially state and local government spending, state and local government hiring, spending by nonprofits and relaunching philanthropic programs, kind of the tools that you would expect to interrupt a cycle of violence that started in 2020 that weren't really available in 2020 and 2021, started to come back into play. And so I think that that's sort of the most compelling answer as to what helped drive it down, even if you can't say that the pandemic or lack of government spending drove it up. I think those things probably tried to bring it down.
Interesting. Yeah. That's something I've always kind of thought myself as well, looking at crime and why it is the way it is and why we had much higher rates in the 80s and 90s and then much lower rates through most of the 2000s and 2010s. And then we had it seems pretty clear that the murder spike was somehow related to the pandemic, given the timing. But it's always pretty complicated to try and work out exactly what is called, because if we could, right, then you just would do the things that prevent murder, right?
Yeah.
Everyone would be for doing that, but it's, in practice, it's a lot more complicated than that, right?
Yeah. And it's hard to just even measure it. And so that makes it exceptionally difficult to figure out exactly what causes it. And if you can't figure out what causes it, how do you stop it? It's a very, I think, difficult challenge in front of people trying to reduce gun violence and reduce murder.
Yeah, certainly. But definitely, I think that concept you've got there of there were fewer resources to try and prevent murder or try to deal with the murder spike during the pandemic because of lockdowns or funding problems or social upheaval that came along with it as well. And then those assets kind of returned across the country at the same, because that's another thing, like this is a nationwide phenomenon, it appears. It's not just one city implemented a new program and they had great success. It's across the board situation, and that would fit with that, I suppose. But I guess we can't necessarily draw a perfectly hard point on this, but that what you're saying does make a lot of sense to me.
Good. Makes sense to me too.
Yeah, it's not really a question there. Right? But yeah, no. So, I believe one of the things that you wrote as well was if the trend continues in this direction, the way that it's gone, even I think if the decline reduces by half, we're still going to be by the end of the year back to the pre-pandemic levels, to the 2015, 2019 levels of murder in the United States. What do you expect to happen when we get to that? Are we going to do you think we'll continue to go down? Do you think it'll level off back to where it had been? What do you foresee?
I think that's an excellent question, and I wouldn't dare to hazard a guess. I would say that there's no reason it can't inherently continue to fall. murder reached a nadir in 2014. There's no reason that the 2019 level is the level we should expect. The 2019 level was different from the 2016 level, which was different from the 2014 level. So there's no reason we can't expect to see continued declines. But if it doesn't happen, it also wouldn't be shocking.
Yeah.
Given how little we understand of the drivers.
Right. Yeah. It just feels like there's so much we still just don't know for sure. I mean, there's obviously a lot of political debates around different policies, how many police are appropriate, what sort of controls on the police are needed. Obviously, that was a huge debate during the pandemic. Criminal justice reform, what actually works to reduce crime and what doesn't. It just feels like we don't really have a total grasp on this as a society at this point.
No, not at all, which is frustrating. I mean, we don't even measure these things. So how do you solve them if you don't measure?
Yeah. Speaking of which, the FBI, I think last time you were on, we talked about this a bit because I alluded to it earlier. The FBI's report, they decided to change their methodology for collecting crime data right in the middle of this murder spike that we experienced. So how are things going today from your perspective with the nation's sort of premier report on crime data, the one that everybody turns to, at least in media, and that most Americans are probably thinking of when they discuss crime statistics, if that's something that most Americans discuss?
So it's substantially improved. They made a change to where they're allowing agencies to report the old system that aren't reporting into the new system, NIBRs. And so they got participation that was very close to what they traditionally get, like 93 or 94% in 2022. In 2023, I'm expecting that their NIBRs participation, which was in 2020 was 60%, will probably be approaching the mid 80% range. I don't know the exact figures. And then, so you have 2023 and you have the SRS data coming on top of that, and you should be in fairly decent shape. New York NYPD is now NIBRs compliant. So they're one of the agencies that are reporting. That's obviously a huge get. There are agencies that are not NIBRs compliant. A handful are working on it. I know LAPD is working on it. But for the most part, agencies that aren't NIBRs compliant may just not be reporting full crime data in the future. And that's going to be okay because most of them are going to be small and not contribute a ton. Is basically where we're at.
But so things have improved. And when this 2023 report comes out later this year for last year's crime from the FBI, you think that'll be more representative than the previous couple of reports we've seen?
Yeah, the 2022 report was pretty good. It was, in terms of breadth of information covered, trustworthiness of the estimates. It was nothing like the 2021 report. I would expect and that trend upwards to hopefully continue.